right now we have some local coverage of the plane crash in Philadelphia, leaves multiple houses on fire, causes explosion. CBS News is reporting emergency crews are responding to an explosion in northeast Philadelphia after a small medical jet crashed in the area of Roosevelt Boulevard and Cotman Ave. Philadelphia police confirmed to CBS News Philadelphia. The plane, a Learjet 55, was going from Philadelphia to Springfield, Missouri, leaving the northeast Philadelphia airport when tragedy struck. The plane crashed into a neighborhood outside the Roosevelt Mall just moments after leaving the airstrip. I don't know if you've seen any of the video, but the video of the actual crash.
Yep.
So this is actually from someone where the crash has crashed into some of the a neighborhood. The debris field, I've been hearing reports that it's about the size of a football field, so about 100 yards by 50 yards or something like that. It was a good-sized plane, had a significant load of fuel, which is why there's all this fire and stuff.
Well, it's right after takeoff, right?
Yeah. So, and if it's heading to Missouri, I mean, that's a decent hike. This is not the picture or not the video of the falling one. Hey, Serge, do we have the one that? Can you pull up the one that where the you could actually see the plane falling? And the reason I want to show that is because it's not. It didn't look like there was a. It didn't look like they were in control and they were trying to land it or anything.
Like there was no descent; it was straight down.
It was something happened. They lost control and it went nose down into the. Thank you very much. Wrong one.
Yeah, after this, you'll see this video of the plane coming down. I mean, it's like full speed, angling, 50-degree angle towards the ground.
The one from the Ring camera, right? Yeah, right here.
And
okay,
after you see this, Ashton Forbes posted on Twitter, it was a missile. So I don't know. That was a little presumptuous there. See
so
that?
There you can see it.
Let's play that a couple more times.
The idea.
It was just straight down.
Yeah, I mean, I do take issue with people that are going to say it was a missile. Maybe they were describing the way that it looked, but it wasn't a missile attack. It was actually a plane.
Well, no, but the nature of the political discourse and everything that happened in the last couple of days. So when this happened, we were watching live on some of I think it was like one of the Fox affiliates here, and they had live chat while they were, on the ground reporting, and a whole bunch of the discussion from the people who were watching or the people who were following along in the live chat were simultaneous discussions about whether it was some type of an attack or whether this was something DEI related, which really, more than anything, just gives you an idea of where the public barometer is for how people feel about these types of events in the culture right now.
Do you feel like there's like conspiracy brain now?
Yeah.
Especially because I feel like
it's because of the internet. Like
I go ahead. I'm sorry.
The point is like when these things happen, right? So I think it said like 1,500 plane crashes a year or something. But the idea here is that you are now connected on the internet and connected to the news 24/7. So before, when you only checked the news, maybe once a day when you got home from work, maybe you read the newspaper when you were getting ready for your day. Now, because you are constantly connected to digital communication, you are seeing these things every single day, and not just in your area, whereas usually you'd be watching local news. Maybe they would have stories on an international level, but most of it was local news unless you were watching cable news like Fox or CNN or like that. So you are seeing far more things, which makes you primed to think that there's connected events when there may be, there may not.
How do you guys feel? I have thoughts, but I want to know what you guys are thinking.
Well, this is human nature.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back to how humans evolved, we were sort of evolved to see patterns because you're more likely to survive. If you go back and you're the ancient hunter-gatherer and you hear a ruffle in the weeds, it's better to think there's a predator there than it just being the wind, because you're more likely to survive for the 1 out of a million chance that there's actually a predator there. And that evolutionary thinking just carried over into our modern thinking. So we see patterns everywhere now. 2 plane crashes happen within a couple of days. They've got to be connected. And humans hate coincidences. They hate it. So we always got to try to connect things. We got to think there's some bigger plan. And the truth of the matter is sometimes just things happen. And we just need to accept that we live in a chaotic world. And instead of trying to rush like people do now to start blaming everyone, trying to draw connections, trying to assume there's some bigger picture. And that's not helpful for anyone. And we got to get control of our basic instincts, I guess you could say, and just have a more rational take on this kind of stuff.
And people have been gaslit for God knows how long, but it's really come out over the last decade, with COVID, where they said, don't wear masks, they don't do anything. And then a couple months later, it's like, actually, masks do something. We just lied to you because we needed the first responders to get the masks. The vaccine prevents transmission. Oh, actually, it doesn't prevent transmission. They found out. And
it was a bat, but it turns out that it was actually the lab where it was grown.
Yeah, so people are hypersensitive to being lied to, and they're willing, I think, overcompensating and saying, so the opposite must be true then of what I'm being told. But then there's also that you can make a living by being a conspiracy theorist, literally online. If you see something happen and you say, I'm going to say that it's this crazy, it's a missile and not an airplane, and you get 10,000 likes and all these comments on your Twitter post, then you get a check for $500.
Yeah, I find
no punishment.
I think that both of your points I think are very solid. My instinct was going to be to say what Ian said, because I think that the fact that the institutions that even normies trusted, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody that was a normal person, they always figured, well, the government is here to take care of us, particularly people on the right, right? The right believed in the government. It wasn't supposed to be the big government, but they believed that the institutions were reliable. They didn't have the same suspicion for CIA the way the left did. They didn't have the same suspicion for the police the way the left did. They didn't have the same suspicion for government overall the way that the left did. And after the way that COVID was treated, and possibly Donald Trump as well, but and I think it probably actually is the way that Donald Trump was treated, because again, Republicans had been the ones that thought they were the ones that were the side that did things the right way. They presented Mitt Romney, who was the most Boy Scout of Boy Scouts. He was as clean and polished and prim and proper and unoffensive as a politician could possibly get, and he still was considered a misogynist. He was called all the names in the books. He's a Nazi, he's a misogynist, and the Republicans finally got to the point where they were like, well, we're just going to give you Donald Trump then. If everybody's a bad guy, we'll just give you the guy that will win.
I mean, they were.
And I think, hold on, and I think that the right has now realized that the centers of power are not good or bad depending on their opinion. They're good or bad depending on who's actually in control of them and who's the person making the judgment about good or bad. Because the left will say, oh, it's okay that, it was perfectly fine that Joe Biden pardoned his son. It's a father doing all the things doing what he can for his kid. He loves it. The left will make the excuses that at one point the right would make. The right used to say, well, if a kid if a black kid gets roughed up by the cops, well, what was he doing? The right automatically sided with the police. Nowadays, I think the right will be like, well, was the cop a good guy? Why were they roughing the kid up? I think that everybody's more suspicious of the institutions now, and I think COVID and the way that the left has behaved in positions of power lately. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, I mean, this is more aligned with how humans have been throughout history, just suspicious of powers, suspicious of people in authority. And if we go back to the ancient times, if there was a whole bunch of calamities happening, they would be like, well, the gods must be mad at the king. That could be a common excuse. I mean, if you go back even to the founding of this nation, you read a lot of the papers in the 1800s, very hostile towards their political opponents. I mean, the idea that the right for a short time was pro-government. Yeah, I see that, but I think it's just going back to the way more aligning with how humans tend to be. We're just suspicious of anyone outside of our tribe. Everyone in our tribe is good. Everyone outside of the tribe is bad. And so we're going to see more of that. And we had this brief moment, I think, where there was a little less of that. It'd be nice to sort of get back to that, but I don't think we're going to be there for decades.
So when you say brief, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question. Say, when you say a brief moment, when did you think that was?
I think the 50s is really the abnormal time in American history.
So the Red Scare? Are we talking
No, well, I mean,
that's a good point, because the Red Scare caused people to start trusting the government more. They're going to protect us from the communists very easily. All we have to do is hide under our desks and the nuclear bomb will miss us nonsense, that kind of stuff. And So I mean, like that definitely sort of moved people in a direction. But I think the more we just saw corruption, I think it started with like Watergate.
So just blissful ignorance for a period of time where
Not so much that it's I guess that might be what I put it, but it was like there was a bigger enemy out there. And I think a lot of what the U.S. government does in a lot of ways is try to make boogeymen so they trust people will trust them. You know, like you know terrorists. You guys got to trust us, so we'll keep terrorists away. Now is the thing. It's not working as well.
I think that's actually why the internet has played such an important role now. So we've had that discussion before. I think me and you have even probably talked about this before. Like even if there was, God, nobody wants another 9/11, but even if there was, the way information is disseminated now, I don't think there would be the same type of coalescing around a nation the way that there was after 9/11. I don't think that that's possible. One, because of things like this, because people will automatically be suspicious, whether it involves our government, foreign governments, but there isn't going to be the rah-rah nationalism that united more people from both sides of the aisle back in, say, 2001, at the latest, and even that didn't last for all that long.
I mean, I agree that it didn't last for all that long.
I'm saying I just don't think we'll ever see something like that again in the age of the internet.
I feel like that the charity that was given was really wasted by the Bush administration.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was a guy that was very, very much a Republican kind of dude. After in the late 90s and early aughts, I was very much a Republican. And then when George Bush squandered all of my my trust, and I was like, okay, well, there's no good guys in D.C. And then I was, I started looking into people like Ron Paul and the libertarians, and I started looking at the government as, always, you should always be, at least to some degree, suspicious. And I do think that, Brett's got a point. I don't know that we would have the same kind of coalesce around the government, especially considering the way that the American people, younger generations, they haven't been taught that America is a good place. They've been taught that America is a bad place. We've been taught that all of the fundamental principles that our country is supposed to have been founded on, we've been taught that they're all lies. Now, whether or not that's true, I think that there's probably a kernel of truth to it, and that's only because human beings are fallible. But generally, I think the ideals that the country is founded on and the aspirations that we have for our country are good. And I think that the United States has been a force for good in the world. But I still think that there's multiple. I think millennials and Gen Z feel less that way than I do. What do you?
Well, I think a lot of it actually has to do with the declining religiosity rates. You go back to the 90s, most people, whether blue or red, were Christian. But that was the core of their identity. I remember being in church and my parents were like, oh, they're voting for that person. But we were all Christians. That's the declining religiosity is, especially on the left, they've moved away from that. So now their core identity then moves to politics. And this is what sociologists have talked about. When you get rid of traditional religiosity, it makes room for political religiosity to move in. And that becomes the new God, the new religion, and everything starts to revolve around that. So when left and right people are now fighting, it's not so much, hey, we'll see you on Sunday even though we disagree. Now it's you're attacking our God, you're attacking our religion. It's going to create more polarization. So this, as religiosity has been declining, unfortunately, politics moves in to fill that gap. Everyone gets more tribal, less trustworthy. And of course, sociological research does show Christianity correlates with less tribalism, less prejudice. What do you expect is going to happen?
So you would see blue dog Democrats next to maybe a Republican at church on a Sunday.
Oh, for sure.
And it's so weird. So I had a boss that I worked with she wasn't very active politically, but she did at least pay attention a little bit. And they were very big. They loved guns. They owned guns. They went to church on Sunday, and they were pro-union. And I had to try to explain to her. I said, they don't support this anymore. Just the fact that you like firearms is something that if you were to try to be involved deeper within the party, you will be expelled for, because it is one of their main selling points when they are trying to fundraise, whether it's anti-NRA, anything anti-weapon, especially with school shootings and things like that. And they hadn't yet realized, because they weren't as politically active as some of us were, just how easy it was to be expelled from the group because the tribalism was so heavy now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you mentioned the fact that we're less Christian, less religious, and I mean, I as a novice person who has limited experience to philosophy, it still makes me think of Nietzsche saying that God is dead, and the average kind of angsty teenager thinks that was some kind of triumphant statement, and Nietzsche was like, this is going to be a horrible thing for humanity, and then we saw the horrors of the first half, the horrors of the 20th century, where it was, first it was communism and Nazism and the fight for which of those two, I want to call them theologies because they both had a significant spiritual element, even if, the communists said that they weren't religious. They said they were atheist. They were state atheists.
Well,
they weren't at all. They didn't behave that way, and neither did the Nazis. So.
Well, I mean, historians kind of talk about them. There's a whole debate about it, but I mean, a lot of them tend to say these are political religions. And like as research shows, I mean, look at like things like Christian nationalism. People are like, this is Christianity's fault. Well, like the 2021 Stroop study shows that Christian nationalism actually manifests among the least churched individuals. And what happens? I mean, it makes sense. If you're on the right and you start moving away from traditional religiosity, they keep a lot of the Christian symbols, but they reinterpret them into political ways. Now Christianity becomes a civilization we have to defend, not an actual religion. And Nazism has been described as a political religion in a lot of ways. We start moving away from traditional. We start worshiping the state, or as in terms of the Nazis, the Aryan race and that thing. Yeah. And what happens? Everything now starts to become more materialistic, more focused on this is our territory, this is our race we have to defend. Tribalism will come up. Whereas if you have traditional Christianity, you have Paul saying there's neither Jew nor Greek, free nor slave, male nor female, you're all one in Christ. Like, yeah, that's going to be more actually inclusive or drawing more people in. But when we move away from that, you take the foundation away, chaos results. And, G.K. Chesterton called it Christian ethics gone mad. Because you take some of the ethics you like, you detach it from its foundation, and it goes off into some wild extremes that just result in horror.
I've heard someone describe communism and socialism as that. So
exactly.
That the ideas and the morality that's laid out in Christianity. I think it was. I forget the guy's name. He's a British guy that does. He's a historian. I think he's a young guy too. Either way, he was describing that if you take the morality that's laid out in Christianity, but take Christ away and take God away, you end up with something like communism.
Was it Tom Holland?
Yes, I think it was Tom Holland.
Yeah, he's not a young guy, but
is he not? Maybe.
Well, you're thinking of the Spider-Man actor.
Yeah.
Oh
He
yes.
has
Okay.
the same
Yes.
name,
That is.
and
Yeah.
I feel so bad for him. I interviewed him on my channel one time. Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah.
He wrote a great book called Dominion, where his book is basically arguing Christianity has saturated the world.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I didn't know the name of the book, but I think I might have heard Ben Shapiro talking about it or something. But it makes sense to me that because when you hear people on the left, they talk about morality and stuff, but without any kind of. If you're an atheist, I find Nietzsche's argument that if there is no God, then man has to make his own morality. Right,
It's the Ubermesh mentality.
Yeah, that without God to tell you what's right or wrong, and if we're all only here for an instant in the grand scheme of things, in the universal time scale, if you're only a flash in the pan, and you're gonna die and your kids are gonna die, and no one's gonna remember you, then it doesn't matter really. And it leads to nihilism and truly. But I don't see why being quote unquote good would matter to someone that didn't have any kind of religion. Like they'll say that they do. They think that good matters. That they say, "Oh, I don't need a God to tell me what's good." And it's like, well, why? Well, and that's what you see with the whole. The communism, it's like, well, you want to be good to people and you want to take care of people. And it's like, well, if we're all going to die and your life is actually only a spark in history of in eternal history, why does it matter?
Yeah, well, to steelman them a little bit, I mean, they're not going to say like it's just great to be evil. I mean, they would argue that being good is its own reward. Like it's good to take care of your family. It's good to have loved ones around you.
But it makes it very easy for them to do some of the most evil things in history.
True, but then you need to ask is like, why are they doing those good things? Well, they want to provide for their family. But I mean, ultimately, what the Christian would argue is that's going to go back down to power. And this is also kind of what Nietzsche was going there. Eventually, all that's left is trying to obtain power for you and your tribe or your family at that point. And that's what we see slowly come out. I mean, if you are a traditional religious person like a Christian, God has all the power.
Yep.
You can't have it. And so the basis now becomes love for him and what he did for us and that kind of stuff. So love then becomes the central Christian message. God died for us. We love him. He loves us. But if you take that away, what is left? Well, love is only useful as long as it brings me power or pleasure in some sense. Helping my family is only good if it brings me power or pleasure in some sense. So you get through the layers of what they're talking about. Yeah, they could argue with, I don't want to go out and rob banks. I want to be a good person. I want to provide for my family. But then you just go one meta level lower. Like, why? Well, what is the driving force? And it's going to be something like power, pleasure, or safety, as C.S. Lewis would have said.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.